America launching its third attack in a week by land, sea and air. While Donald Trump was in Washington inspecting his White House renovation, behind the scenes he ordered a complete demolition job on 140 Iranian targets.
Hello, welcome to Media Watch. I'm Linton Besser. And tonight, the perfect deal to down arms promoted by America's Commander-in-Chief now in flames. The US and Iran defaulting instead to missile diplomacy with no end to the conflict in sight.
The promise of peace shattered. One blast after another in the port city of Bandar Abbas.
Iran strikes against commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz and a rain of American missiles in reply came amidst the official state mourning for Iran's slain supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The spectacle of his funeral carried across the world by hundreds of reporters. To France, the People's Republic of China, the United Kingdom, and of course, the US of A. These scenes, not just an outpouring of grief, but a choreographed show put on for the world. Iranian state media revelling in the attention.
Foreign journalists are amazed by the epic loyalty of mourners of the martyred leader in Tehran.
So how free were these hundreds of foreign correspondents to tell the story of the funeral as they saw it? The Guardian's diplomatic editor, Patrick Wintour, told us.
Some reporters were not allowed out of Tehran, but we could talk to anyone and no one checks your copy.
Those mourners who agreed to interviews with the foreign press sang for the regime, but a reporter for the New York Times cautioned.
I don't think anyone should assume those voices represent all Iranians. There was an unmistakable sense of caution.
Only one Australian correspondent was in Tehran, the ABC's Karishma Vyas, who bravely included in her package the views of a dissident who took part in recent demonstrations.
One of those protesters we'll call Panian told the ABC that when she looks back over the rule of this criminal dictator, she sees nothing but darkness, devastation, poverty, corruption and bloodshed.
It was, in fact, the reporter's second stint in the Iranian capital. 6 weeks ago, she was reporting on the state of Iran's wartime economy and was called upon by Iran's foreign ministry to ask this.
Under what conditions will Iran agree to open the Strait of Hormuz? Will there be tolls imposed on ships?
But then, too, the ABC's reporting from inside Iran came with serious limitations, as its correspondent consistently made clear.
The ABC was allowed to report in Tehran. We were granted access to particular events and places that the government likely wanted us to see.
Her high-profile question had also been vetted by Tehran, which the ABC failed to reveal to television viewers, but did so online. Following Vyas's first reporting trip to Tehran, some 2,700 people, largely members of the Iranian diaspora, complained unsuccessfully to the ABC. One activist telling us it wasn't the trip to Tehran that was the problem. Rather,
the problem is that the reporting presents a highly controlled environment as though it represents the reality of Iran.
And at least one member of parliament agreed.
This rare access delivered little more than the transmission of a state-approved narrative.
So with these restrictions and the grave risks involved, why go to Tehran at all? Paul McGough, the former Sydney Morning Herald correspondent who reported the 2003 US bombing of Baghdad from Baghdad, told us.
If we're reporting that allied countries are dropping bombs, we must report the impact of those bombs. Wars are fought in the name of and at a cost to the people of the nations involved. They have a right to be fully informed of the consequences.
The ABC said a disclaimer about the pre-vetted question did not make it to television because the press briefing occurred very close to deadline and...
We've gone to great lengths to seek the voices of ordinary Iranians in our stories. The journalists deployed do so at personal risk, and their compelling storytelling benefits our audiences.
The core doctrine that drives the work of any correspondent is the duty to bear witness, a dangerous job never more important than in times of war. Yes, the Iranian regime is an odious sponsor of global terrorism, But it is, nonetheless, one of the three key players in this conflict. And it is right to go there to document the country as best we can. And if journalists are transparent about the conditions imposed upon them, the audience really should be trusted to be able to think for itself. And now to the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism and the national broadcaster's long-awaited day of reckoning.
Anger in Sydney's CBD as protesters demanded the inquiry hear from anti-Zionist Jews. Inside, the country's public broadcasters took the hot seat, defending coverage of the Israel-Gaza war.
Since Hamas's bloody terrorist attack against Israel in October 2023 and Israel's devastating retaliation, the ABC's reporting of the Middle East conflicts has prompted some 8,000 complaints to the broadcaster and a barrage of allegations of bias.
The media in this country has spread falsehoods about the Middle East conflict that have demonised Israel and fuelled the hatred pushed by Islamist extremists and other anti-Semites. Disgracefully, our own national broadcaster, the publicly funded ABC, well, it's been one of the worst offenders.
The Australian newspaper has taken up the campaign with gusto, applying its blowtorch to the ABC's Middle East coverage. Its opinion pages never shy.
Blaming and vilifying Jews.
It's as easy as ABC.
Journo bias can no longer be ignored at ABC.
Similar criticisms levelled by Australia's would-be Communications Minister.
These institutions, including the ABC, have sown division in our community. There has been some pretty stark examples of biased reporting.
ABC television hosts fielding the same sentiment live on air 2 days after the Bondi massacre.
ABC, I've got to say, will you cut out the biased reporting? Mainstream media, we feel will you cut it out? Will you actually let us have a voice?
For those aggrieved by the ABC's Middle East coverage, the Royal Commission, tasked with investigating the prevalence of anti-Semitism in Australia's institutions, was a singular opportunity. After all, there is no bigger, no more influential cultural institution in this country than the ABC, which was represented at the hearings by both its Ombudsman, Fiona Cameron, and its editorial director, Gavin Fang, the latter of whom was confronted by this egregious broadcast, which was wrong and had already been corrected by the BBC 3 hours earlier.
There are 14,000 babies that will die in the next 48 hours unless we can reach them.
A devastating warning from the UN's humanitarian chief over the desperate need for more aid in Gaza.
And yet was repeated through the day until finally corrected on air 10 hours after that first report.
The UN has since clarified the risk of 14,000 babies dying is over 12 months, not 48 hours.
And not corrected online for 7 days, an eternity in a 24-hour news cycle.
Yes, it was a bad mistake.
Gavin Fang was also taken to this article concerning a deadly Israeli airstrike on Gaza, which failed to report important context, not least the Hamas rocket attack on Tel Aviv, which prompted it. The story, again, not corrected for 7 weeks. Counsel assisting the Commission putting to Fang a pattern of late and inadequately prominent corrections.
We try to make a correction or an apology or a clarification as soon as we can to the audience. It's a really important principle to try to reduce the harm.
In fact, neither of these examples are news to anyone closely watching. They were investigated by the ABC's independent ombudsman, who found in both cases the ABC had breached its editorial standards for accuracy, having omitted material context and, in the case of the 14,000 babies, included significant errors which were not corrected soon enough. But was either of these mistakes evidence of bias? The Ombudsman didn't find that they were, and on Thursday, Gillian Siegel, the government's anti-Semitism envoy, was asked what she thought about that latter case.
You accept it was not any finding of impartiality or bias?
The Ombudsman said it was inaccurate, and that is what it was. I don't have any view as to what was the motivation of anyone.
So critical a point, counsel assisting the inquiry put it another way.
Do you accept the incident does not suggest a lack of balance on the part of the ABC?
I think balance is a very complicated story. If you wanted balance after that negative story, should there have been a very positive story about what was being done positively in the Middle East to feed children?
Gillian Siegel used her testimony to relay concerns the ABC has published a disproportionate number of stories critical of Israel and urged the Commission to listen to
a very serious perception that a community under attack here in Australia feels that the trusted national broadcaster is not presenting the situation in the Middle East in a way that they think is not biased and accurate.
But 2 years into the job, Siegel handed up little evidence as to whether this perception was well-founded.
Can you provide an example from what's been reported to you of a public broadcaster taking an anti-Israel perspective?
I think rather than any specific, I mean, I do focus in on one specific example. Difficulty, Mr. Lancaster, is if you take one specific example, people go, oh, but this could be this, it could be that. But it is the overriding quantum of everything and where it's placed and the emphasis.
And earlier was pressed on the anecdotal nature of the criticisms advanced in her submission to the inquiry.
Would you agree it's difficult to test propositions when they're expressed at that level of generality?
Well, exactly. But they are a perception and a very strongly held perception from the Jewish community.
And what of the fact that after thousands of complaints and 2 years of almost non-stop coverage of the conflict, only 4 items cited by the Commission were found to have contravened the ABC standards?
That shows a tiny proportion of complaints substantiated as breaches, doesn't it?
I don't know what it shows. It certainly shows what the Ombudsman found, but my contention is that the Ombudsman is not necessarily looking at the picture that I'm advocating.
Those unhappy with the Ombudsman's findings about broadcast material can also complain to the regulator, the Australian Communications and Media Authority. But it hasn't identified a single breach by the ABC, which Gillian Siegel dismissed.
Well, I just don't accept that because I think that it depends what we're looking at. And my contention is, in addition to an individual complaint against an existing standard, we should be looking at the totality of the way in which the stories are presented.
Now, to be fair, it's not Gillian Siegel who is responsible for investigating the claims of anti-Semitism at the ABC, but the Royal Commission, with its $130 million of funding. So, with the broadcaster finally in the box, did the inquiry set about getting to the bottom of this alleged problem? Answer, no. And why not? We'll let the Commissioner herself explain.
When we come to consider the public broadcasters, it is not part of the Commission's function to resolve individual complaints of anti-Semitic conduct in the workplace or generally to investigate claims of biased reporting in particular instances.
Which is why the interrogation of the ABC, just 2 hours last week, was so light touch, disappointing many, including one of the ABC's biggest critics.
I wonder, is this Royal Commission now going to hold the ABC to account at last? Well, I don't know. But when it refuses to hit the ABC's bias watchdog man with example after example of the ABC's culture of contempt for Israel, I'm not optimistic.
A spokesperson for the inquiry told us it is confident it's discharging its duties, quoting Virginia Bell's words from the hearing.
Commissioner Bell stated, "The Commission's focus is on the adequacy of the broadcaster's complaint handling mechanisms, including with respect to allegations of bias in the reporting of events in the Middle East relating to the State of Israel.
After 2 years of the most grievous allegations that the ABC is riddled with anti-Semitism and bias, how on earth can this inquiry, established to be a fact-finding mission on these very questions, skate over the detail? I suspect the Commission's ludicrously tight deadline is part of the answer, but it's a decision which satisfies no one. None of the organisation's critics and none of its defenders. And most importantly, it does nothing to help the Jewish community determine once and for all where their fears might be well-founded and where they might not. And finally, to one of the world's most well-known fashion mags on the cinematic experience of the year.
Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey cast.
Every actor and their character explained.
Last week, the Australian edition of the Paris-based Marie Claire magazine, the so-called Thinking Woman's Glossy, brought readers this insight into the epic remake of Homer's The Odyssey. But it was this errant paragraph at the end of a section about Robert Pattinson's performance as Antinous, which had thinking women thinking twice.
This version feels a little tighter and more magazine style, and embracing his villain era lands more naturally than stepping into his villainous arc.
A stray editor's note? If only.
On Wednesday, an article was published on Marie Claire Australia, which included an AI prompt that the reporter had used to help refine the wording of the piece.
Resulting in a very refined piece of work indeed. As soon as it was detected, a few other oddities were pointed out by eagle eyes online, like the repetition of these paragraphs, removing the telltale sign of AI slop, the dreaded M-, and leaving the fingerprints behind. Cue a social media furore and the disappearance of the article, though the real scandal is what the magazine told us in its defence, because this use of AI is, wait for it,
in line with our media's AI policy. There was no breach of our AI policies by the reporter.
And what wonderful policies they are, turning Marie Claire into Marie Claude. And that's all from us tonight. Be sure to check us out on ABC iView, as well as YouTube, Facebook, and also Reddit. You can find full statements on our website, and don't forget to send us your tips. See you next week.